In the darkest hour of galactic history, when the Dominion shadow fell across 10,000 worlds and freedom became nothing more than a whispered memory, one human stood defiant against the endless night. Marcus Chen didn't ask to be humanity's final guardian, didn't seek the weight of Earth's last standard-bearer upon his shoulders. But when the alien overlords declared his species extinct and his homeworld nothing but cosmic dust, he made them a promise written in starfire and sealed with blood. They would remember the name of Earth. They would remember what it meant to be human. And before the last star died in the universe, they would learn that some flames burn too bright to ever be extinguished. This is not just a story of survival. This is the chronicle of how one man's refusal to surrender became the spark that ignited a rebellion spanning galaxies. This is the tale of humanity's last standard and the beacon it became for every soul who dared to dream of freedom in a universe gone dark. Welcome to the legend that would reshape the cosmos forever. Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the cold metal bulkhead of the transport ship, feeling the vibrations of the failing engines through his bones. Outside the small porthole, Earth burned. Not the gentle orange glow of sunset he remembered from his childhood in New Shanghai, but the harsh white fire of atmospheric bombardment. The Dominion fleet hung in orbit like metallic vultures, their sleek hulls reflecting the death throes of humanity's birth world. "How many made it out?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible above the groaning of stressed hull plating. The transport ship Defiant Hope had been designed to carry 500 refugees. They were currently packed with nearly 2,000 souls, the last remnants of a species that had once dreamed of touching the stars. Captain Sarah Rodriguez didn't look up from her console. Her weathered hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, but Marcus could see the tremor in her fingers. 43 ships total, she said. Maybe 200,000 people if we're lucky, out of 12 billion. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 12 billion lives reduced to ash and memory in less than 6 hours. The Dominion had been efficient. He had to give them that. No demands for surrender, no ultimatums, just the cold calculation that humanity had become inconvenient. Marcus turned away from the porthole and surveyed the crowded cargo bay. Families huddled together on improvised bedding, children clutching toys they'd grabbed in their desperate flight. An elderly man sat alone, staring at nothing, still wearing the uniform of Earth's planetary defense force. The badges and insignia meant nothing now. There was no more Earth to defend. But there, tucked carefully in Marcus's travel pack, something did remain. He pulled out the carefully folded fabric, its blue and white and red still vibrant despite everything. The flag of the old United Nations, the symbol that had represented humanity's first tentative steps toward unity among the stars. His grandfather had carried it during the colony wars, his father during the expansion conflicts. Now it was his burden to bear. "Sir," a young voice called out. Marcus looked down to see a girl, maybe 10 years old, with dirt-streaked cheeks and eyes far too old for her face. "Are we going to be okay?" Marcus knelt down to her level, carefully folding the flag back into his pack. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Well, Emma, I'm going to tell you something my grandfather told me once. He said that as long as good people remember what we're fighting for, we can never really lose." He glanced back toward the porthole where Earth continued to burn. "And we're not going to let anyone forget." The ship shuddered suddenly, emergency lights flashing red. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands brace for jump. We've got Dominion scouts closing on our position." Marcus helped Emma find a secure spot against a cargo container, then made his way to the bridge. The corridors were packed with refugees, but they parted to let him through. Word had spread that he was Marcus Chen, the diplomat who had tried to negotiate humanity's survival, the man who had looked the Dominion Chancellor in the eye and refused to surrender Earth's sovereignty. On the bridge, the tactical display showed their desperate situation. 3 Dominion hunter ships, their weapons powered and targeting systems locked. The refugee fleet was scattered across local space, some ships already beginning their jumps to hyperspace while others struggled with overloaded systems. "Where are we heading?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez pulled up a star chart. Kepler Station, it's neutral territory or was last week. Maybe they'll give us sanctuary. And if they won't? She met his eyes. Then we keep running until we find someone who will. The jump to hyperspace felt different this time. Usually the transition was smooth, barely noticeable except for a slight tingling sensation. Now it felt like reality itself was tearing apart, which Marcus supposed it was. Everything they had known, everything they had built was gone. In hyperspace, surrounded by the swirling colors of folded space-time, Marcus found himself alone on the observation deck. The flag lay spread across his hands, and he thought about what it represented. Not just Earth, but the idea of Earth. The notion that different people could come together, could choose cooperation over conflict, could reach for something better than what they were born into. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Nicomo, the xenobiologist who had been part of his diplomatic mission. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her dark hair escaping from its professional bun. "I keep thinking about what the Chancellor said," she murmured, joining him at the viewport, that humanity was a statistical anomaly that needed to be corrected. Marcus nodded grimly. The Dominion's reasoning had been coldly logical. In their survey of galactic civilizations, they had found that aggressive, expansionist species inevitably led to resource conflicts and instability. Better to eliminate such problems before they spread. "They made one mistake," Marcus said quietly. "What's that?" He held up the flag, its colors bright even in the dim light. "They assumed we were just another aggressive species. They didn't understand what this represents." He traced the fabric with one finger. "This isn't about conquest or expansion. It's about hope, the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, that we can be better than we are." Dr. Nicomo smiled sadly. "And you think that's going to matter to anyone out here? The galaxy is full of species that have learned to keep their heads down and their mouths shut. The Dominion has been in power for 3 centuries. Nobody remembers what freedom even looks like. Then we'll remind them." The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. Marcus had always been a diplomat, a negotiator, someone who solved problems through careful discussion and compromise. But standing there with Earth's ashes behind them and an uncertain future ahead, he felt something hardening in his chest, a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. The ship dropped out of hyperspace 12 hours later, and the bridge erupted in controlled chaos. Kepler Station hung before them, a massive orbital facility that served as a trading hub for a dozen different species. But surrounding it were the familiar wedge-shaped hulls of Dominion warships. "They're hailing us," Rodriguez reported. "Standard surrender demand." Marcus watched the tactical display, counting ships and calculating odds. The refugee fleet was down to 37 vessels now. Some had suffered mechanical failures, others had been forced to make emergency stops. Against 6 Dominion cruisers, they had no chance in a fight. "Open a channel," Marcus said. Rodriguez looked at him questioningly. "Sir, we're not in any position to negotiate. I'm not going to negotiate." The main screen flickered to life, showing the aristocratic features of a Dominion fleet commander. The alien's pale blue skin was marked with the ritual scars of the military caste, and his 3 eyes regarded Marcus with obvious disdain. "Human diplomatic vessel, you will surrender immediately. Your species' rebellion has been concluded. Submit to processing." Marcus stepped forward, and behind him he heard Dr. Nkomo's sharp intake of breath. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same expression he'd worn when facing down the Chancellor. "Fleet Commander," Marcus said formally, "I am Marcus Chen, last recognized representative of the Human Alliance. I have a message for your Chancellor." The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your species no longer has representatives. Your homeworld is ash. You are nothing." Marcus reached into his pack and withdrew the flag, holding it up for the alien to see. "As long as this exists, as long as one human draws breath in defiance of your tyranny, we are not nothing. Tell your Chancellor that Earth remembers. Tell him that we will not go quietly into the night." The Dominion commander's expression darkened. "Destroy them." But before the order could be carried out, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls marked with the symbols of a dozen different species. The Kepler Station defense fleet, but more than that, Marcus recognized some of the vessels from the Diplomatic Corps database. "This is Admiral Kethvar of the Centauri Republic," a new voice announced over the communication channel. The speaker was a Centauri, tall and graceful with their characteristic feathered crests. "You are in violation of neutral space. Withdraw immediately." The Dominion commander's three eyes narrowed. "Admiral, we are conducting legitimate security operations against terrorist elements. I see only refugees seeking sanctuary," Admiral Kethvar replied smoothly. "And I see the flag of a sovereign world being disrespected by invaders. The Centauri Republic does not recognize the Dominion's claim over human space." Marcus felt his heart racing. He had known Admiral Kethvar during the trade negotiations 2 years ago. The Centauri were normally cautious, unwilling to challenge the Dominion directly. But something had changed. "Admiral," Marcus broadcast on an open channel, "I request formal sanctuary under the Galactic Accords. These people are the last free citizens of Earth, and they deserve the protection of civilized law." For a long moment, space was silent except for the background hum of ship systems and hyperspace resonance. Then Admiral Kethvar spoke again, and his words carried across every ship in the system. "Sanctuary is granted. To Marcus Chen and all who follow him, Kepler Station offers safe harbor. To any who would harm those under our protection, know this: the age of unchallenged tyranny ends here." The Dominion ships held their position for another tense minute, weapons powered but not firing. Then, without another word, they jumped back to hyperspace. Marcus sank into a chair, the flag still clutched in his hands. Around him, the bridge crew was celebrating quietly, but he felt only the weight of what had just happened. Admiral Kethvar hadn't just offered sanctuary. He had issued a declaration of resistance broadcast across every monitoring station in the sector. Nikomo placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it. They're listening." Marcus looked down at the flag in his hands. 3 colors that had once represented a single world, now carrying the hopes of a scattered people. But more than that, it had become a symbol for something larger. The idea that freedom was worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. "No," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning." Through the viewport, Kepler Station grew larger as they approached. It was a mixed population hub, representatives from dozens of species living and working together. Most of them had been born under Dominion rule, had never known what it meant to make their own choices. But today, they had chosen. They had chosen to stand up, to say no, to remember what their ancestors had lost. As the Defiant Hope docked with the station, Marcus carefully folded the flag and placed it back in his pack. Tomorrow there would be meetings to attend, alliances to forge, plans to make. The Dominion wouldn't ignore this challenge forever, and when they came again, it would be with overwhelming force. But tonight, for the first time since Earth burned, Marcus Chen allowed himself to hope. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless worlds where people lived in quiet desperation, dreaming of freedom they thought was impossible. Word would spread of what happened here, of the day a human refugee held up a simple piece of cloth and reminded the universe what courage looked like. The last standard of Earth had found its first followers. The beacon was lit, and in the darkness of space, other lights were beginning to flicker in response. The Dominion had won the battle for Earth. But the war for the galaxy's soul was just beginning, and Marcus Chen, diplomat turned rebel, keeper of Earth's last flag, would make sure they never forgot the cost of trying to extinguish the human spirit. 3 months had passed since the incident at Kepler Station, and Marcus Chen barely recognized himself in the mirror of his assigned quarters. The soft-spoken diplomat had been replaced by something harder, more determined. His hair had grown longer, and there were new lines around his eyes from long nights planning impossible missions. But it was his hands that showed the greatest change. Where once they had been smooth from a life of negotiations and paperwork, they now bore calluses from weapons training and the rough work of building a rebellion from nothing. The quarters themselves were Spartan, just a bed, a desk, and a small viewport that looked out onto the bustling docking bays of Kepler Station. But mounted on the wall, carefully framed behind protective glass, hung the flag of Earth. It had become more than a personal memento now. People came to see it, refugees and sympathizers alike, standing quietly before the simple piece of fabric as if it held the power to change their world. A soft chime announced a visitor. Marcus looked up from the intelligence reports scattered across his desk to see Dr. Nikomo entering, accompanied by a figure he didn't recognize. The newcomer was tall and thin, with the characteristic silver skin of the Vorthan species. Their large, multifaceted eyes reflected the light like jewels, and their movements held the precise grace that came from a lifetime in variable gravity environments. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Commander HFY of the Vorthan Resistance," Dr. Nikomo said. "They've traveled quite a distance to speak with you." Marcus stood, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. The Vorthan regarded it for a moment before reaching out with their own three-fingered appendage. The touch was surprisingly warm, despite their metallic appearance. "The pleasure is mine, Commander," Marcus said, "though I should point out that I have no official rank. I'm just a man with a flag and some very dangerous ideas." Commander HFY's head tilted in what Marcus had learned was the Vorthan equivalent of a smile. "Perhaps that is why we have come such a long way to meet you. Official ranks are given by governments. What you carry comes from something deeper." They moved to the small conference area near the viewport where Marcus had taken to holding his growing number of clandestine meetings. The view of Kepler Station's docking bays served as a constant reminder of how far their movement had already spread. Ships arrived daily now, not just human refugees, but beings from across the galaxy who had heard whispers of resistance. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said, settling into his chair. "The reports I've seen about the Vorthan worlds are contradictory." Commander HFY's multifaceted eyes darkened, literally shifting from silver to deep purple. "The Dominion's propaganda machine is very efficient. They portray us as content subjects, grateful for their protection and guidance. The reality is somewhat different." Dr. Nikomo activated a holographic display showing a detailed map of the Vorthan star systems. Red markers indicated Dominion military installations, while yellow showed industrial complexes and mining operations. The Vorthan Collective was one of the first major civilizations to fall to the Dominion, Commander HFY explained. "That was nearly 200 years ago. Our resistance has been underground, you might say. Small acts of sabotage, information gathering, helping political prisoners escape, nothing that could be called a true threat." "Until now?" Marcus asked. "Until now," the commander confirmed. "Your actions at Kepler Station have rewritten the rules of engagement. For the first time in 2 centuries, someone stood up to a Dominion fleet in open space and lived to tell about it. Word has spread to every underground cell, every hidden base, every secret meeting of people who dare to dream of freedom." Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. It had grown heavier with each passing week as more people looked to him for leadership he wasn't sure he was qualified to provide. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Commander HFY leaned forward, their voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Coordination. For 2 centuries, resistance movements have operated in isolation, each group afraid to trust others, afraid that reaching out would lead to exposure and death. But your flag, your symbol, it's given us something to rally around, a common cause that transcends species." Dr. Nikomo brought up another holographic display, this one showing a complex network diagram. "We've identified resistance cells on over 40 worlds. They range from small groups of dissidents to well-organized underground armies. Most don't even know the others exist." "And you want to change that?" Marcus said, beginning to understand the scope of what they were proposing. "We want to build a network," Commander HFY confirmed. "Sharing intelligence, coordinating strikes, supporting each other's operations." The Dominion's greatest strength has always been that they only had to face isolated threats. But if we could present them with a galaxy-wide uprising, Marcus stood and walked to the viewport watching the constant flow of ships in the docking bays below. Each vessel represented a story, a journey, often a desperate flight from oppression, but increasingly they also represented hope returning to the galaxy. "The risks are enormous," he said, still facing the window. "The moment we start communicating between cells, we create vulnerabilities. The Dominion's intelligence network is sophisticated. They'll be looking for exactly this kind of coordination." "Yes," Commander Zephi acknowledged, "but the alternative is to continue as we have been. Separate, isolated, ultimately ineffective. Your people proved that sometimes taking a big risk is the only way to achieve meaningful change." Marcus turned back to face them, and his gaze fell on the flag mounted on his wall. Earth's colors seemed to glow in the artificial light, a reminder of what they had lost and what they were fighting to regain. "There's something you need to understand," Marcus said slowly. "I never intended to become a symbol. I was just angry and tired of watching good people suffer while tyrants prospered. But if this flag, if what it represents, can help bring hope to others, then I accept that responsibility." Over the following weeks, Kepler Station became the unofficial capital of what historians would later call the Galactic Resistance. Ships arrived at all hours, captains and crew members who had risked everything to attend secret meetings in cargo bays and maintenance tunnels. The station's administrators, led by Admiral Kethvar, maintained the pretense that this was simply increased commercial traffic. But everyone knew what was really happening. Marcus found himself at the center of it all, learning to balance his natural diplomatic instincts with the harsh realities of organizing an insurgency. The flag of Earth became the Resistance's official symbol, reproduced on hidden banners and coded transmissions throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, the values it represented began to take root in the most unlikely places. The breakthrough came during a meeting with Captain Jin Watanabe, one of the human ship commanders who had escaped Earth's destruction. She brought with her intelligence that changed everything. "We've been monitoring Dominion communications for weeks," she explained, spreading data tablets across the conference table. "Their command structure is more fragmented than we thought. The Chancellor rules from the core worlds, but sector governors have significant autonomy, and some of them are growing nervous about the resistance activity." Dr. Nakomo leaned forward, studying the intercepts. "These conversations suggest disagreement at the highest levels. Some want to crush the resistance with overwhelming force. Others prefer a more subtle approach." Marcus picked up one of the tablets, scrolling through translated conversations between Dominion officials. The language was formal and coded, but the underlying tension was clear. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion leadership was facing organized opposition, and they weren't sure how to respond. "This is our opportunity," Commander Zephi said, their eyes shifting to the excited silver that indicated intense focus. "While they're debating strategy, we can expand our operations." "Carefully," Marcus cautioned. "The moment they perceive us as a real threat, they'll stop debating and start carpet-bombing resistance strongholds." But even as he spoke, Marcus was thinking about the possibilities. The resistance network had grown beyond his wildest expectations. Commander Zephi had made contact with 17 different species' underground movements. Captain Watanabe's intelligence gathering had identified key Dominion installations that were vulnerable to sabotage. And every day brought new volunteers, beings who had lived their entire lives under occupation and were finally ready to fight back. The first coordinated resistance action took place on a cold morning in the Rigel system. 3 separate teams representing 4 different species simultaneously struck Dominion supply depots on 2 worlds and a space station. The attacks were carefully planned to minimize civilian casualties while maximizing disruption to military operations. Marcus watched the reports come in from the command center that had been hastily established in Kepler Station's lower levels. The operations went better than anyone had dared hope. All teams achieved their objectives and extracted without losses. More importantly, the simultaneous nature of the attacks sent a clear message throughout the galaxy. The resistance was no longer a collection of isolated cells, but a coordinated movement. The Dominion's response was swift and brutal. Within hours, their fleets were moving toward known resistance strongholds, and their propaganda networks were broadcasting declarations that the terrorist threat would be eliminated with extreme prejudice. But something unexpected happened as well. More resistance cells revealed themselves, launching their own attacks in solidarity with the Rigel operation. "It's spreading," Dr. Nicomo reported, her voice filled with wonder as she tracked the incoming reports. "Sabotage operations on 6 different worlds, propaganda broadcasts from hidden transmitters, even some open demonstrations on civilian worlds." They had succeeded beyond their dreams, but success meant the Dominion would no longer underestimate them. The real war was about to begin. That evening, as he stood alone in his quarters looking out at the now familiar sight of Kepler Station's docking bays, Marcus reflected on how far they had come. 3 months ago, he had been a refugee with nothing but a flag and a desperate hope. Now he was the unofficial leader of a galaxy-wide resistance movement that was growing stronger every day. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Emma, the young girl he had met during their escape from Earth. She had grown in the months since then, not just physically but in ways that made his heart ache. The innocence in her eyes had been replaced by a determination that reminded him of himself. "Mr. Chen," she said formally, "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For keeping your promise. You said you wouldn't let anyone forget about Earth." "And now everyone knows we're still here." Marcus knelt down to her level just as he had on that desperate flight from their dying homeworld. "Emma, what we've built here, what we're fighting for, it's not just about Earth anymore. It's about making sure that no child anywhere in the galaxy has to grow up the way you did, afraid and running from people who think they have the right to destroy worlds." She nodded solemnly, then surprised him by pulling a small object from her pocket. It was a crude reproduction of Earth's flag, obviously handmade from scraps of fabric. "I made this for my room," she said, "but I want you to have it for when you need to remember that what you're doing matters." As Marcus took the small flag, feeling the care and hope that had gone into its creation, he realized that the symbol had grown beyond anything he had imagined. It was no longer just about remembering Earth. It had become about believing in tomorrow, about the conviction that ordinary people could stand up to tyranny and win. The war for the galaxy's soul had begun in earnest, and the flame of resistance was spreading to every corner of known space. The Dominion had the ships, the weapons, the centuries of experience in crushing opposition, but the resistance had something more powerful: the unshakable belief that freedom was worth any sacrifice. And at the heart of it all, Earth's last standard flew as a beacon for everyone who refused to surrender their dreams to the darkness. The attack came at dawn, Kepler Station time. Marcus was in the command center when the proximity alarms began their shrill warning, yanking him from a brief moment of rest over intelligence reports that seemed to grow grimmer by the day. The holographic display showed them approaching, 70.3 Dominion warships led by the massive dreadnought Inevitable Truth. It was more firepower than had been assembled in this sector for decades. "How long until they're in weapons range?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would be measured in minutes rather than hours. 12 minutes, Admiral Kethvar responded from his position at the tactical console. The Centauri Admiral's usual composure was cracking, his feathered crest standing on end in obvious agitation. "Our defensive fleet has 37 ships. We're outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Marcus stared at the tactical display, watching the red icons of the Dominion fleet advance with mechanical precision. After 6 months of successful resistance operations, they had known this moment would come. The Dominion had finally decided that Kepler Station represented too great a threat to ignore. "Evacuation status?" he asked. Dr. Nicomo looked up from her console, her fingers still dancing across evacuation protocols. "We've got 40,000 people on this station. The civilian transports can carry maybe half of them in a single trip. We need more time." Time they didn't have. Marcus could see the calculations running behind Admiral Kethvar's eyes, the cold mathematics of combat that showed their defensive fleet had virtually no chance against the approaching armada. They might delay the inevitable, might buy the evacuees a few extra minutes, but the outcome was predetermined. "There is another option," a voice said from behind them. Marcus turned to see Commander Zephe entering the command center, their metallic skin reflecting the red warning lights and patterns that hurt to look at directly. The resistance cells throughout the sector have been monitoring communications. We can call for help. Help from whom? Admiral Kethvar demanded. Every government in this sector knows what's coming. None of them will risk their own worlds to save ours. Commander Zephai's multifaceted eyes shifted to the deep purple that indicated intense emotion. Not governments, the people. Every successful resistance operation has inspired others. There are ships out there, Admiral. Smugglers, pirates, merchant captains, even some military vessels whose crews have decided they've had enough of the Dominion's rule. They're waiting for a signal. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced when he first stood up to the Dominion Chancellor. It was hope mixed with desperation. The knowledge that sometimes the only choice was between certain death and impossible odds. "Send the signal," he said quietly. Admiral Kethvar's head snapped around. "Marcus, we're talking about asking civilians to fly into certain death. These aren't trained military personnel. Most of them have never been in a real battle." "Neither had I 3 months ago," Marcus replied, moving to the communications console. "Neither had most of the people in this room. But sometimes ordinary people decide they've had enough of watching evil triumph because good people do nothing." The general broadcast went out on all frequencies transmitted by hidden relays throughout the sector. It was simple, direct, and signed with the symbol that had become the rallying cry of resistance throughout the galaxy. "To all free beings in the Rigel sector, Kepler Station is under attack by overwhelming Dominion forces. We do not ask you to sacrifice yourselves for our cause. We ask only that you remember what this place represents. If freedom is to survive in our galaxy, it must be defended not by governments or armies, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept tyranny as inevitable. The choice is yours." Marcus Chen, bearer of Earth's last standard. For 3 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The Dominion fleet continued its approach, and Admiral Kethvar's defensive ships moved into formation for what everyone knew would be their last battle. In the civilian areas of the station, the evacuation continued with desperate efficiency, families clutching their few possessions as they ran toward transport ships. Then the first response came. A battered freighter captain identifying himself as Jorik Steelwind announced that his ship was changing course for Kepler Station. Then another, a small patrol vessel whose crew had mutinied against their Dominion officers. Then more, each transmission adding another voice to a growing chorus of defiance. "My God," Dr. Nakomo whispered, watching the sensor displays as new contacts appeared throughout the system. "They're actually coming." It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking sight Marcus had ever witnessed. Ships of every size and description were converging on Kepler Station, their crews knowing full well they were flying into a battle they couldn't win. Ancient cargo haulers flew alongside sleek racing yachts. Converted mining barges shared space with hijacked patrol boats. Each vessel represented someone who had decided that some things were worth dying for. The final count was 143 ships with Earth's last standard in hand. He became the beacon for all who fought back. HFY. Epic Sci-Fi Stories.